Okay, so when we are working on graphing, every time we want to identify a certain spot on a graph, it takes two pieces of information. Like this spot right here, it's named 4 and 0 because you have to go on the x-axis to the 4 and then you're lined up with the y-axis at the 0 on the y. Or this spot right here, it's at 5 on the x-axis, and then you have to go up to what aligns with the 3 on the y-axis. So the address for this spot is 5, 3, 5 on the x, 3 on the y, and that tells you the location of this dot. Now, excuse me, whenever a line crosses an axis, so we know our x-axis is always the horizontal line and the y-axis is always the vertical line. The location where the line crosses these axes is a specific address. It's called the intercept. It's kind of like in the game of football when a runner is running along and he's trying to cross paths with a football that somebody threw. It's that spot that they cross paths where we say he intercepted the football. And so that's what's happening kind of here, where a line is crossing path with an axis. We call it an intercept. So if it's crossing paths with the x-axis, then that spot right there is called the x-intercept because it crosses paths with the x-axis. And notice on this spot, when it crossed this path, if we named the address for it, it's at, let's see, -7 on the x, but 0 on the y. And then notice over here in this line, when it crossed the x-axis, it had 4 on the x and 0 on the y. Notice in both of them, the y value is 0. It turns out that for x-intercepts, every time you identify where they're at, the 0 goes in the y spot. And notice when we do the y-intercepts, this spot right here, I would say it's at 0 on the x and -3 on the y, because it lines up with the x-axis at the 0 on the x-axis, but it goes down to -3 on the y. And look at this one here. We would say, oh, it's at 0 on the x, but it's at -10 on the y. So the y-intercept, if you have that, then the x value is 0. So it's always the opposite situation. Like, excuse me, I meant to say, if they're asking for the x-intercept, then the opposite letter is 0. So x-intercept has a y as a 0, y-intercept has x as a 0. And those are identifying very specific points on a line. There's a lot of other points on the line, like, this spot right here on this graph could be identified as -5, -1. You have these go into infinity, so every number in infinity would eventually touch this line one way or another. But the very specific points, the y-intercepts, are what touch the graph on the axis. And the next one, I'll show some examples.